Good morning to this T-Level Transition Programme Round 1 and 2 National Learning event. We are so excited to have you join us here this morning. We can see we've just got the final numbers joining the call, so that's just going to conclude now. And I'm going to do some welcomes and introductions. Next slide, please, Steve. Hello, and it's lovely to be back. I'm Stephanie Crane, and I'm Delivery Leader T-Level Programmes at the Association of Colleges. This morning, I am joined by an absolutely fantastic panel of guest speakers, but also the entire AOC T-Level support team to help you facilitate and take any questions throughout the morning that you might have. I can see some familiar faces in joining us this morning, so I'm so excited to catch up throughout the morning with you all. Firstly, I'd like to introduce, and if you could give us a quick wave, Jackie Baines from the Department of Education. There we go. Joss Howarth from the Department of Education's T-Level Transition Programme team. Thank you. And Dr. Nuala Burgess from King's College London. So a really exciting panel of guest speakers here this morning, and also an opportunity for you to talk with your peers and catch up, as you know, we know them really, really well now, as we've been on this T-Level Transition Programme journey together. Next slide, please, Steve. So today's webinar will provide you with a greater understanding of where the T-Level Transition Programme sits within your landscape as an institution, an understanding of how the curriculum reforms impact the T-Level Transition Programme. And we're very, very lucky to have Jackie here this morning, who's going to share some updates with you all about that quality review reform. Identification of successes and barriers to success, and identify strategies to address these. So we're on the journey now. We've all been on this for quite some time, and you know, as part of that journey, there's refinements that have been made, and we're really excited for you to share what is working well, what has been a challenge, and how you've managed to overcome those, because unlocking those challenges is so beneficial both for your peers, but also the future waves that come behind you. So we're really excited, and I hope peers are excited to share those discussions. Next slide, please, Steve. So just some basic housekeeping. We do ask that when the main speaker is speaking, that the speakers are kept, your personal microphones are kept on mute. We love to see your faces, and there's some familiar faces in the group. So please, if you can keep your camera on, we ask that you do, just so we can see a smiling face back at us. It's nice. But also when we're in the group chats, that you can try and engage in those group chats and just be really conscious of the environments around you. And there will be opportunities throughout the day to put comments or questions within the chat function, so please use it. It needs to be an interactive environment, and we want it to be an interactive environment. Next slide, please, Steve. So a quick run through of our agenda today. So first up, we've got Jackie Baines from the DfE, Qualification Reform Lead for Level 2 and below. Thank you so much, as I said before, for joining us, and I know we've got a really interesting group of discussions for you as well, of lots of questions, I'm sure, if you're kind enough to take them. Then we've got Dr. Nuala Burgess from King's College London, who's doing approaches to a teaching embedding English and Maths for T-Level Transition Programme and T-Level. And we know that is so crucial for success in T-Level Transition Programmes. So I'm really excited to hear, as I'm sure all our guests joining us today are, those outcomes from that work that she's been doing and some of those insights. And then looking at strategies for success with your T-Level Transition Programme. So setting the scene for discussions, and Stephen Wasserson, our AOC lead for T-Level and Transition, is joining us just to share those. So what's been working well? And then there's some time for you to have some discussions and to share challenges on key topics, but also success barriers that you've overcome. There will be some comfort breaks put in, slotted in throughout, so please use those to ensure that you feel comfortable throughout the morning, because we do appreciate online it can be a little bit too much. And then we've got feedback and close, so we'll just make sure we round off the morning's activities. Next slide, please, Lee. So before I go into the podcast series, I just want to put out a personal plea that we're really, really interested to hear about T-Level Transition Programme students who have been successful and are now thriving on the T-Level programmes that you have. We know there's lots of them out there, and we're really excited to potentially do some case studies about them, but also get them signed up to be T-Level ambassadors, because they are the success stories of the T-Level Transition Programme. So if throughout the day anyone wishes to just say, actually, we've got some superb examples, I'd be really interested, and the team would be really interested to get in touch afterwards with you and just explore those a little bit more. So please put your hand up or just send me an email or pop my email in the chat function. But we want to really, they are the proof of the success of your T-level transition program. So if you have some fantastic students who are alumni of your T-level transition programs now studying T-levels, please can you reach out and contact me, and we will be in touch to explore those more and really highlight them as positive case studies. I am going to hand over to Mr. Steve Wasserson now, just to tell you a little bit more about a new podcast series that is even on Spotify. So I'm jogging along listening to the T-level transition program now in my evenings, and it's absolutely fantastic. So we can't wait to share it with you all. Steve.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, just to flag to you, in case you don't already know, that we have launched a podcast series for T-level and T-level transition program in and around how to plan for success, and each of the podcasts covers a different topic. So the podcasts are available, as Steph said, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, and so on. Or if you just Google DfE T-level and T-level program, transition program, you will be able to get to the podcasts, and you can subscribe to get some new updates. We have just recorded the first 5. So the first 5 are now recorded, and the episodes are on screen there. Of the 5, they're not all quite ready for release, but they're recorded, and the latter ones will be released very, very shortly. So I've listened to the first 3. They're brilliant. Good insight from a variety of different providers talking about particular aspects of their planning for T-level and for T-level transition programs. So if you do get a chance to, it's well worth a listen. Whilst I'm on a blatant advertising campaign, I just want to flag a couple of events that are coming up. So not necessarily primarily designed for round 1 and round 2 providers, but if you've got new staff who are planning a transition program, we have a series of face-to-face technical focus groups on preparing for the holistic delivery of the T-level transition program. They are face-to-face. The venues are in the process of being identified, but we're doing them regional to allow face-to-face attendance, so that you don't have to travel half the length of the country to get to them. So they're covering all the routes of the transition program that are available. They're not route specific. So we'll share these slides with you after the event, so you'll have access to the links, but we'll keep in touch through our various channels to identify where the venues actually will be. Also, we have a round 4 webinar on planning for progression to T-level on the 10th of May, which is online. And again, although you're round 1, round 2, if you've got new staff who are potentially planning a transition program for the first time, it might be worth signposting this to them. And as I said, you'll get this link, and you'll get these slides, and you'll get the links to share with anybody that you need to once the event is over. And finally, in more of an industry placement support, we have a webinar run by the Prince's Trust on the 26th of April. And the Prince's Trust are identifying a programme for students who have done industry placement on the T-level and are potentially still needing a little bit extra support before they can access the workplace. So the Prince's Trust are going to do a webinar to explain their support program for these potential cohort of students. And so again, when you get the links, you will you'll be able to register, and you'll be able to send that then to maybe your industry placement coordinator, and so on. So before I pass to Jackie, I want to just pass to Joss to just do a quick welcome from the DfE, who then will pass to Jackie, just to say that throughout the morning we have got timings and so on. If time allows, well, we can have some face-to-face questions to the presenters, but if time doesn't allow, then we'll capture the questions. If you can use the chat function to type any questions in, we can capture these questions after the event, we can forward them to the facilitators, we can get answers, and we can share that with everybody afterwards. So please, please feel free to type any questions into the chat. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to pass to Joss from the DfE.
Hi everyone, I'm Jace Howarth. I head up the team in the DfE, working on the T-level transition programme that's been in place for a few years now. I'm really pleased to speak to you briefly all today, and particularly to see you all here today at this learning event for T-level transition programme around 1 and 2 providers. As those of you who've joined these before know, these are really excellent sessions, and they're made all the better by you all joining in and having the opportunity to hear from and share with each other. That's how these events really come into their own. So thank you for joining today. It's a big year for the transition programme. As Steph has alluded, started to talk about this, first cohort we progressed on to T-levels will be finishing their T-levels this year, so it does feel like a really massive moment for our programme. And so I will plug again Steph's keenness, our joint keenness to get some really great case studies of students to help promote the transition programme and raise awareness of the benefits. So that's both of first year T-level students or second year T-level students. It doesn't have to just be those who are completing their T-level this year. And if you do have case study material or you're happy to work with us to develop some of them, please do contact Steph at her email address that she's posted in the chat so that we can move on to developing some materials around that. And I feel we've got some really great materials in all sorts of different formats now. So we've got video case studies that some of you here have contributed to. We've got the podcast series this year, which is really fab and have been really popular and been have lots of views and clicks from our newsletters and things. So I definitely recommend them, and they are also under 30 minutes, so very much bite size. So I do feel the next our next move in materials land is case studies of our students now, and they can do all of you proud, I think. So do please come forward if you've got some potential candidates you can put forward for that. Also actually on case study material, I think we're still really keen on showcasing how you guys are evolving your programs and the lessons you're learning about what works to support progression to T-level. So that's very much in scope of the work and our focus in the next period. So same thing, if you've got if you're happy to take part in that, then please do come forward. And then lastly, I was going to give a big plug for the technical focus groups, which Steve has set out the next dates for. These are really fantastic. They're facilitated by our education advisors who held the pen on the national technical outcomes that have been developed for the transition programme. And so these sessions are all about how do you implement them in practice. Face-to-face really works for these sessions. The education advisors have thought hard about what can they deliver online and what is really most effective face-to-face. So please do take up those opportunities and put forward staff who may not have benefited from that so far. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to need to drop off for a short period, but I will be back as I have got out of my other more boring stuff to stay with you guys.
Thanks very much, Jose. I think I'm taking over from here. So good morning, everybody. I'm Jackie Baines, and I'm one of the policy leads working on the qualifications review at level 2 and below. And I'm delighted to be here this morning to give you an overview of the reforms at level 2 and below. So the aim of this session is really to set out for you what the wider landscape at level 2 will look like in the future, so that you can see how the T-level transition programme fits into that landscape. And I thought it might be helpful to just start by explaining how we got to where we are now, and to outline how we'll be taking the reforms forward following the feedback we got to the consultation that we ran last year. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. The Qualifications Review launched in 2018, and it's part of the government's technical education reform programme in response to the Sainsbury's Review of 2016, which highlighted weaknesses in the quality of technical education. So the review recognised that the qualifications landscape is complex, with thousands of qualifications at level 3 and below, and many we know are likely to be excellent, but it's not a consistent picture, and it's quite hard to tell which ones are high quality and will lead to good outcomes for the students and which ones won't. So our first stage consultation took place in 2019, and this set out the driving principles for the review, that all qualifications in future should be high quality, necessary, have a distinct purpose, and support progression to good outcomes for the students who take them. Then in July 2021, following a second consultation, we confirmed our position on level 3 qualifications that will receive public funding alongside T-levels and A-levels. And at the same time, we ran a call for evidence on level 2 and below qualifications and study programmes. Then in spring last year, we consulted for the third time, this time on our proposals for level 2, level 1 and entry qualifications. And then in October last year, we published the government's response to the level 2 and below consultation. And this is what I'm going to go through with you today. So the policy has now been agreed with ministers, and we're starting to implement the reforms across all levels. Now, the first phase of reform took place last year when we started streamlining the offer by removing funding from qualifications with sustained low or no publicly funded enrolments in England. So this actually resulted in the removal of public funding for around 5,500 qualifications at level 3, level 2 and below. And this work was completed in August last year. Phase 2 of the reforms involves removing 16 to 19 funding from qualifications that overlap with T-levels. And a qualification overlaps with a T-level if it's a technical qualification with similar outcomes to those set out in the standard covered by a T-level, and if it aims to support students into employment in the same occupational area. And then finally, phase 3 of the reforms concerns qualifications that are approved for funding from September 2025 onwards. And this is the phase that we launched earlier this year. And I'm sure you're all aware that in January, we published details of the new approval process and the criteria for level 3 qualifications. Now, this will be updated soon to include details of the first cycle of approvals for qualifications at level 2 and below. And we'll be starting with a small range of technical qualifications at level 2. If we can move on to the next slide, please. I thought it was worth just recapping on the proposals that we made in the consultation on level 2 and below. So overall at level 2, we said that qualifications should either support progression to further study or work-based training at level 3, or they should lead directly into skilled employment in sectors or occupations where level 2 skills are needed. As at level 3, the majority of technical qualifications at level 2 should in future be aligned to employer-led occupational standards. So these are the same standards that underpin T-levels and apprenticeships. This direction of travel was signalled in the Skills for Jobs white paper, and it'll give employers and learners confidence that these qualifications are giving people the skills, knowledge and behaviours that are needed to enter a particular occupation. For learners studying at level 1 and entry level, the focus for most people should be either on progression onto a technical qualification at level 2 or 3 that leads to employment in a skilled occupation, or progression to a work-based pathway such as an apprenticeship or supported internship. For several of the qualification groups, we set out guideline size ranges that we think are appropriate for qualifications to meet their intended purposes. And for 16 to 19-year-olds, we've also considered how those qualifications would sit alongside other components in the study programme when we set these sizes. But we are keen to emphasise that the sizes are intended to be guidelines only. So ultimately, a qualification should be an appropriate size to make sure that it fulfills its purpose and objectives. As at level 3, in future, all qualifications at level 2 and below will need to go through an approvals process and meet various quality and other criteria in order to receive public funding. But in future, these qualifications will be approved for 3 years rather than 12 months as they are at the moment. So hopefully this will give schools and colleges time to plan their delivery. Next slide, please. So in future, we'll be considering for funding 17 different qualifications groups at level 2, level 1 and entry level. These will be in addition to qualifications that are already out of scope of the review, like GCSEs, functional skills, essential digital skills qualifications, project qualifications and performing arts graded exams. And they'll all continue to be funded. Now, 17 groups sounds like a daunting number, but for 16 to 19-year-olds, in reality, there are only 3 types of qualification that will probably form the core of a study programme. And these are technical qualifications at level 2 that lead to skilled employment. The second group are progression qualifications leading to technical study at a higher level. So this could be level 1 qualification supporting progression to a level 2 technical qualification, or it could be a level 2 qualification supporting progression to level 3. So for example, a qualification that's used as part of a T-level transition programme. And then the third group are progression qualifications at level 2 that lead to academic study at level 3. Now we recognise that for some learners, they'll go into employment without reaching level 2, and that for a small minority, they'll be aiming first and foremost for independent living. So we're continuing with our plans to develop national standards for personal, social and employability qualifications. We've already set up the expert panels of stakeholders to help us develop these standards, and the work is well underway. Colleagues in our essential skills team are also considering updating the national standards for adult literacy and numeracy, which relate to the alternative English and maths and ESOL qualifications. Now, you might recall that in our original consultation, we proposed a 2-year study programme for qualifications leading to employment. However, having listened to the feedback from the sector, we have now changed our approach, and we're now offering more flexibility by allowing qualifications leading to employment at level 2 to be taken by 16 to 19-year-olds in under 2 years, if that better meets the needs of those students. This will be at the discretion of providers, and we need to keep in mind that students do need to stay in some form of education or training until they're 18, but there's a bit more flexibility there. We're committed to having flexibilities in place to ensure students with special educational needs and disabilities can access these qualification groups, and we'll regularly review the mix and balance of qualifications approved to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all learners. And at entry levels 1 and 2, we're also planning to fund vocational taster qualifications that provide students with an opportunity to explore industries and occupations before they decide which one they want to pursue. Now, the next few slides set out the qualification groups that we'll fund, and they're grouped under 3 headings. So if you can have the next slide, please. Firstly, we have qualifications that support progression to employment. These are mainly technical qualifications at level 2 that are very similar to the technical groups that we'll fund at level 3, and where the approvals process will be led by the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. And these qualifications are mostly based on the occupational standards. It also includes prerequisites to employment at level 1, such as health and safety qualifications. Now, the groups outlined in red will be reformed as part of Cycle 1 in a limited number of occupational routes. And these will be available for first teaching from September 2025. The remaining occupational routes will be reformed in Cycle 2. Now, Cycle 2 also includes those qualifications outlined in green, and these will be available for teaching from September 2026. Next slide, please. Secondly, we have qualifications that support progression to higher levels of study. Now, this includes 2 groups at level 2 that support progression to level 3, one on the technical side and one on the academic side. And it's group 1, qualifications supporting progression to further technical study at level 3, that would include any qualifications that might be designed to be taken as part of a T-level transition programme. Now, this group also includes qualifications that support progression to qualifications that are delivered outside of a T-level programme. So, for example, qualifications for adults, or those that deliver outcomes that are different to the T-levels. Now, these progression qualifications will be introduced in Cycle 2, so for first teaching from September 2026. This slide also includes qualifications at entry level and level 1 that support progression to level 2 or level 3 technical study, and these will fall into Cycle 3. So we are splitting these groups over the years. And I'll come on to a timetable a little bit further on. Then finally, on the next slide, please. Here we have basic skills and personal, social and employability qualifications. So under the basic skills heading, we'll fund ESOL qualifications from entry level to level 2, and English and Maths qualifications, which are alternatives to GCSEs and functional skills qualifications at level 1 and entry level only. And finally, personal, social and employability qualifications, as I mentioned earlier, will need to be aligned to new national standards that we're developing at the moment. And just a reminder that GCSEs, functional skills qualifications and essential digital skills qualifications that are out of scope of this review will also continue to be funded, as will performing arts graded exams and projects qualifications. So moving on to the timeline then, if we can have the next slide. Thank you. This slide sets out the delivery timetable with reform phased across 3 years from 2025 to 2027. Now, we do understand that the changes we're proposing across the qualification system as a whole, including at level 3, are significant and a significant undertaking for many providers and awarding bodies. We're aiming to strike a balance between a phased approach and sustaining momentum so that more students can benefit from high quality qualifications. So you'll see here that the first cycle of qualifications to be reformed will include a limited range of qualifications leading to employment at level 2, as I mentioned earlier. And it's cycle 2 that includes the qualifications supporting progression to higher levels of study, including progression to T levels. Next slide, please. So this final slide outlines the next steps. We will very soon be confirming the detailed approval process and criteria for level 2 technical qualifications in cycle 1, and these will be taught from September 2025. We expect the process to look very similar to the process for level 3 technical qualifications that was published in January, and the draft approval categories for level 2 are already available on the IFATE website, so it might be worth taking a look if you haven't done so already. Ofqual has already consulted on the regulation of level 2 and below qualifications leading to employment, and this consultation closed on the 20th of March. Now for cycle 2, Ofqual is currently consulting on how it should regulate qualifications supporting progression to higher levels of study. So please do take a look at this, and if you have time, do respond to that consultation. It's open until the 25th of May. And as I'm sure you know, both the Department for Education and Ofqual have already consulted on qualifications that support progression to T level specifically. Those consultations have now closed, and there'll be further consultation later this year once the responses have been analysed. That's all I was planning to say, but I hope that's been helpful in setting the context for the T-level transition programme. If we have time, Steve, I'm happy to take a couple of questions, but if not, if you'd like to put any questions in the chat stream, we can pick them up outside of the meeting and get back to you with a response later. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jackie. I think probably just based on time, if anybody does have any questions for Jackie, if you can type them into the chat, and then we'll share that with everybody. We'll share the responses with everybody afterwards, because you know, I would hate for sort of answers to be sort of rushed and missed and whatever. So I think yeah, if we do that. So any questions for Jackie on what she said, then if you pop in the chat. And just to reiterate that we will share the slides. I think. Are you okay, Jackie, for your slides to be shared? Yeah. So we will share the slides after the event, so you will have access then to all the links and so on too. So you can explore further when you've got a bit of capacity to do so. So thank you very much, Jackie, for that. So moving on, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nuala Burgess, who is working from King's College London, and has done some excellent research on embedding English and Maths and T levels. But it's not for me to introduce her. I'll let her introduce herself. So I'll let move on to Nuala. So Nuala, over to you. You're on mute at the minute, Nuala.
Classic error. Classic error. Okay, let's start again. But thanks very much, Steve, for that. And good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to talk a bit about the research project, which examined approaches to teaching embedded English and maths for T-levels. And the intention is to give some tips and advice resulting from the research, which we hope will help learners on T-level transition programs to be T-level ready. So first I'll explain why we were asked to research English and maths for T-levels, and then I'll explain what our research entailed, what we did very briefly, and then the bit that I hope will be most interesting to you, what we found with examples of successful T-level teaching, which I believe you could use on transition programs. I'll end with some recommendations for CBD based on what lecturers told us they needed to help them with the T-level teaching and for teaching embedded English and maths in particular. So first was why research English and maths for T-levels? Well, we were approached, Professor Chris Winch and I, and as Steve said, we're both at King's College London, when the T-levels first came out and they were pitched as this elite or gold standard level 3 qualification. There was great excitement about T-levels, but there was some criticism. The balance of the 80% classroom teaching and 20% work placement meant an awful lot of academic content to cover in class. Some lecturers were actually quite nervous about the type of English and maths required. So the first things that lecturers more familiar with BTECs had to learn was that T-levels can't be taught using a modular approach. There's just too much content. So in order to cover all the T-level content, you have to teach several topics or one or two topics, like blended together. So T-level teaching is very different. It takes a more holistic or interdisciplinary approach. But the great news is that this kind of approach really helps to embed any naturally occurring English and maths quite easily. So very briefly, what did the research entail? Well, we covered the first and second wave of the T-level rollout, and we ran an online survey of FE and sixth form college staff all over the country. We interviewed college managers, T-level lecturers, English and maths specialists, and curriculum leads. And I conducted some group interviews with T-level students, and I observed some T-level teaching in the classroom. The kind of T-levels I looked at were design, surveying and planning for construction, education and education and childcare. I did health, science, and I also observed building services engineering for construction. So now with Steve's help, I'm going to take you through some slides which explain our findings, and we'll end with some recommendations. So the first slide, Steve, is language used. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you very much. So the language used for English and maths. Well, the first thing that struck us was the sheer variety of language lecturers were using to describe English and maths for T-levels. Some hated embedded because it suggested hidden, while others felt English and maths should be kept under the radar. Some preferred contextualized or naturally occurring English and maths, but all these words suggested a sort of anxiety over the best way of teaching any English and maths without intimidating learners. Many learners, even those with GCSE grade 4 and above, had had bad experiences with GCSE English and maths. And I guess some of you out there will have disillusioned GCSE learners on your transition programs, but I hope some of the teaching ideas today might help to lower those anxieties about English and maths. Now, some of you may be aware, and this is the next slide, Steve, thank you. Some of you may be aware that there are 6 general English and 10 general maths competencies or skills included in every T-level subject specification. Now, here's just a sample. This isn't all of them, but lecturers teaching on the T-level transition year might find it useful to start introducing some or all of these into classroom tasks. Now, as you can see, they ask for things students have probably met during their GCSEs. There are presentation skills, writing for different audiences, costings and measurements. Now, the next slide, thanks, Steve. It's important to bear in mind that the general English and maths competencies are a set of skills intended to help develop T-level students' English and maths. They're not assessed separately. They're just a set of really useful skills to build into classroom tasks. But I think it's worth mentioning at this point, before we go on, that actually in the first term of the T-level teaching, lecturers said they found they were having to help students with more basic English and maths skills. So to be T-level ready, we would recommend that for English, learners need help with understanding the different types of action or doing verbs, i.e. how to write appropriately when asked to describe or analyse or evaluate, and the difference between them. And for maths, typically, the skills which students needed help with were calculating percentages, estimating measurements, the placing of decimal points, and working out the area or parameter of something, and understanding the difference between these two measurements. But confidence in basic English and maths comes very quickly once they're integrated into classroom tasks. So now for the next slide, and some examples of how lecturers achieve this. So thank you, Steve, for that. So typically, a T-level task will be designed around a scenario, usually based on a real life context, using local knowledge or local scenarios and businesses, which encourage learners to draw on technical knowledge and language and some incidental or naturally occurring English and maths. And all we mean by technical knowledge and language are those words and concepts which are unique to individual T-level subjects. For example, sustainability is a technical concept for construction. SEND, special educational needs and disability, is a technical concept for education and childcare. And digital infrastructure is a technical concept used by digital skills students. Now, T-level construction learners might be set of tasks, for example, using a real life scenario. And when I was in one college, they were setting their tasks based on real life building projects, which form part of a regeneration of the local town. And one task they were set was to design and cost a new shopping complex for the local town centre. And they had to use sustainable building materials and considerate building methods. And it included access facilities and parking. Now, to make it interesting for the learners, this task was carried out as a competitive group task, with each group adopting a company name and having to pitch their costed design project to the council being the lecturer or teaching team. And learners then presented their costed design using a PowerPoint and submitted a written report in the form of an attractive brochure. Now, in that task alone, learners researched necessary planning and access laws. They used maths to measure and cost their design. They used oral presentation and written skills, and even some computer, graphic digital skills. This project-based learning style of task was a really popular way of approaching T-level teaching, encouraging learners to draw on different types of knowledge and employ several naturally occurring English and maths skills in a single holistic or interdisciplinary task, a kind of multifaceted task, if you like. And another example, very quickly, was where education and childcare learners on their early years option were given a nursery school outing to organise and cost. And it involved taking a group of 25 under 4s and 4 and 5-year-olds to a working farm in their local area. And the students had to research access and travel, organise a timetable for the day, calculate the ratio of adults to children for the different age groups. They had to calculate costs, including additional costs and adult support for 3 children with additional needs. And finally, they had to compose appropriate letters to parents and guardians, giving all the practical details of the outing and the reasons for choosing a working farm. So that's just a taste of the kind of real life context teaching that I observe. Now to sum up, just some of the findings and recommendations. So the next slide, Steve, thank you. Findings 1. So our findings, beg your pardon, sorry. So our findings show that in the first term, learners needed help with the English, understanding the different action verbs, how to write appropriately when asked to describe, analyse and evaluate. And for maths, they needed help with the basic math skills, estimating, decimal points, calculating area and parameter. So these are things I'd bear in mind if I was teaching on a T-level transition program. See if you can get those in the first term and sort of get them ready for their T-level. And then for the next slide, our bigger findings, if you like, our findings to project-based learning, case studies and real-life scenario context allow for holistic or interdisciplinary teaching and are the best way to include naturally occurring English and maths. Technical language comes far more naturally to many T-level learners than GCSE English, and that's the good news. And also we found that maths in real life context, part of project-based learning, took the fear out of the maths that quite frankly, a lot of GCSE maths students have felt. And as a result of our research, we had several recommendations to make to colleges if they wanted them. And of these, there are 3 key recommendations in the final slide. Thank you, Steve. So our recommendations are, there were others, but we felt these were the 3 key ones. Colleges should allow time, not during prep or student contact time, and resources for CBD focused on approaches for embedding English and maths for specific T levels. And lecturers were really strong on this. They didn't want English and maths, how to teach English and maths specifically. They wanted it pertaining to their particular T level. How do I embed English for construction? How do I embed maths when I'm teaching education and childcare? The next recommendation was that T-level networking with other T-level lecturers and English and maths specialists to provide mutual support, plus advice and guidance, and to ensure good practice. And we noticed lecturers were doing this anyway, but the recommendation was they might have someone with some expertise as part of those networks. And finally, that colleges should allow additional time and resources for lecturers wishing to update their own GCSE English and maths skills before delivering T levels. Lecturers wanted to be able to speak the same language, if you like, when explaining details of a maths calculation, or for example, the scaffolding of a written assignment. And that essentially is it. Those were the recommendations, those were the findings. And the only thing is there's a final slide, Steve, if anyone wants to ask any questions or any observations. Last time I spoke to people, it was quite nice. A couple of people came to me and wanted to chat a bit further, and we had a Zoom. You're more than welcome. But that's the end of me. Thank you very much for your time and your attention.
That's great, Nuala. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute or two, so I can see on the screen. We have time for a couple of questions. There's one from me actually, and you know, as I'm asking the questions, I'm going to put mine in first. On one of your earlier slides, you put the phrase slipping English and maths in under the radar, and I'm sort of thinking back to my time in FE when, you know, we were trying to kind of virtually introduce English and maths by stealth, and you know, trying to develop these skills without the students knowing that they're actually developing these skills. So is there any recommendation in terms of actually signposting to the students? You know, I'm sort of thinking about in terms of breaking down barriers. Is there sort of mileage in terms of actually signposting to the students that, hey, this is what we're doing here?
Well, I'm an ex-teacher, so this has been my advice. Yes, you're meant to highlight. It's absolutely appropriate to flag up these are English and maths skills. I have to tell you though, I'd be reading the room and I'd be looking at my students. I know that in some classes, I'd come at it gently. I probably wouldn't mention it initially. I'd start slipping them in. And then I say, now look, guys, this is what you've done. This is your English. This is your maths. Celebrate it. You've just cracked a maths problem. So I think I'd probably, you know, it would adapt. But yes, you are meant to highlight, and quite rightly, because it's not fair on them. And indeed, I think it's good teaching to say, these are English skills. These are maths skills. Perhaps the timing of when you say it might be the way you adjust it, Steve, but that's just my opinion as a teacher and from what I observe.
Lovely, thank you. There's a question, and if anybody does want questions, please type them into the chat. We've got one question in the chat, and you mentioned before about the skills that students need when starting T-levels, and there was a question about, did you notice any difference about students who gained direct entry to T-levels as opposed to students that had come through the T-level transition programme first?
You need to know here that when I was doing this research, we just stopped last year, there were no young people from transition years. I would like to see it. I would like to see some of the students coming through from transition to CIT. It's a really, really good question. There was a big difference in skills with those who'd scored, if you like, the higher grades in GCSE. You did see more confidence. You did see certainly ease with maths, I noticed. So I think it depends on the preparation of the transition year. My hope is that with good transition preparation, they'll be fine. They'll be absolutely fine. The maths isn't necessarily complicated. But to be honest with you, with the T-levels I was watching, observing, I didn't think the maths and English was so outlandish. There wasn't anything, except science. There is more complex maths and science skills in that one, but I think those are very specialized students who scored pretty highly in science GCSE. But to get back to the point, I did not myself observe any students coming through from transition years. I think it's a piece of research that we need to do. I think it's a really good idea, but it hasn't yet been done. Sorry about that. Can't answer you better.
Yep. No, it's okay. So at least if we've planted the seed, then
yeah, no, I totally. I think
Yeah.
it's a really good point to raise, and I am part of a research group. I will say it. I will mention this. I will raise it. It's a really interesting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it will be interesting as well to it's obviously part of what we've mentioned at the start about case studies and so on as well.
Yeah,
but these types of things will be useful. So
yeah.